Morning, everyone. Today we have an exciting guest. His name is Ryan Burns, and this is the Invisible Architecture series. And we bring in so many different eclectic subjects, and Ryan is really one that is eclectic. And my name is Carol Asa, and good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Carol. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you.
Yeah, I thought since your life is just so in all of your research, all your esoteric research, that maybe you could give us a little bio about yourself, and then we could just go from there.
Sure. Gosh, where do I start? Well, I began researching the Uintah Basin and the mysterious area surrounding Skinwalker Ranch years ago,
Where
decades.
is that? That is in Nevada or Utah?
That is northeastern Utah.
Northeastern Utah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a magical area known as the Uintah Basin.
Okay.
And yeah, decades ago, I began researching it, but to make a long story short, when my passion finally kind of overcame me and I could no longer just sit on the sidelines,
Mhm.
I left my corporate job in Salt Lake City. I moved to the very desolate and remote Uintah Basin to investigate the area full time. And fast forward now, I own a property overlooking most of the high strangeness. And I started a podcast known as Hero Paranormal. And I've written a few books about the high strangeness, but it's definitely something that I had to kind of quench my questions.
Well, that was a good decision. I mean, most people don't take that huge leap. That was a major decision, wasn't it?
Yeah, it probably was not didn't make a lot of business sense,
Yeah.
but now looking back, I think that it was necessary.
And you should tell the viewers that your ranch that you own is right next to the infamous Skinwalker Ranch, right?
That's right. I have a little base camp, as I like to call it. It's a ranch known as Space Wolf Research,
Okay.
and we do all kinds of investigations and research into science, technology, engineering. And basically, I try to work with other content creators, advanced working groups,
Mhm.
and I try to look at a lot of the neurotheology because a lot is going on between the ears of the observers when they watch these things of high strangeness, and that's kind of the niche that
Uh-huh.
I like to concentrate on.
Taking it to a whole new level
I try.
instead of just observing it. So why don't you get, I would love like if you give a little overview of what a skinwalker is, to the Navajo and Hopi and how we got that, all that terminology.
Of course. So the way it was explained to me by my Native American indigenous friends was that, you know, not all witches are skinwalkers, but all skinwalkers are witches.
Okay.
And um
Which is
in the
gone
very
bad.
right, it's very advanced magical, what they call dark medicine or bad medicine.
Okay.
And it is a scenario where a witch or someone that's practicing what they call the witchery way
Mhm.
has gotten a taste of that power, which really isn't theirs, but they're able to manifest it and manipulate it for their own needs.
Okay.
And they basically get absorbed by that darkness. In other words, it's a lot like, I believe it was Nietzsche that said, if you stare into the abyss long enough, it stares into you. And it's very much a case where there is this union between dark entities
Uh-huh.
and the magician, and the magician is, by many accounts, overtaken by the dark entity, becomes very powerful, and is able to transform or shift their appearance and their shape, usually into animals of their choice, but the most popular would be wolves or coyotes.
Oh, okay. So it's these shape-shifting entities that people are seeing. Now,
Yeah, very oftentimes they will put the actual furs or
uh-huh.
the hides of these animals on, and at that time the the magical process takes over and they take that form.
So to other humans, they appear as that animal, not just wearing a cloak.
Correct.
Oh, okay. And have you seen any?
I have. I've
You
seen
hear about that?
more times than I wish I could admit.
Okay. And how, describe a couple experiences, if you will, and how do you protect yourself?
Sure, great question. Let me go into the most recent,
Okay.
or the two most recent, because they are related.
Uh-huh.
And those were cases where, okay, the first time I had a friend coming out to pick me up just to go to breakfast out there.
Uh-huh.
And he's actually our head of security. His name is Alan. And he came by to pick me up for breakfast. We had driven just a couple miles down the road, an area known as Three Corners,
Uh-huh.
for people who are familiar with that area. And we basically saw, for lack of a better word, a younger uh, indigenous female jump over a fence. She
Uh-huh.
had no clothing on at all, only had a satchel, which they use of animal skin and fur, which they use to keep their magical items in.
Uh-huh.
Only had a satchel, no shoes, no clothing, jumped over a fence, a full-size barbed wire fence, crossed the road in front of us, waved and smiled, and I smiled and waved back. And then she jumped over the next fence and ran into the pasture. And we both, I mean, we had to pick our jaws up from the
Yeah.
floor. We didn't know what we had seen. So that was fairly recent, but more recently, I was actually speaking at a conference known as the Moon Lake Gathering up in Altamont, Utah.
Uh-huh.
And I was with my mother of all people, and we were coming back to Space Wolf Research,
Uh-huh.
and we saw the same one again. However, this time she was, and this rarely happens that you see them twice. So this time it just looked like a black bundle on the road,
Uh-huh.
like a dead dog or an animal, a carcass of some sort. And then basically it stood up and seemed to kind of shake off a little bit. It had a leather strap in one hand. She, I guess I should say, had a leather strap in one hand, was partially closed this time, which is good because my mother was with me. And and then stood up, no shoes again, same satchel. However, this time she had red face paint on and again waved and smiled. And my mother, we went by very slowly. I said, "Oh my gosh, Mom, that's the one I saw with Alan."
Wow.
And she was blown away. She wanted me to turn around and go back. But
Oh
speaking,
no.
yeah, uh, I decided not to turn around and go back.
But it was weird that she was just like a lump there.
Very strange the way it came out of, yeah, like you said, like a
Like,
lump.
yeah, like just. And so what do you think this means for your future?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So, according to the Hopi elders that I've been speaking with, the demoness, according to their oral tradition, who empowers skinwalkers, manifests as a female with a red painted face.
And she
So
had a
this
red
is,
painted face?
yes,
Oh, okay.
this is concerning because if you see her in this dimension, according to them, it's because she is targeting your consciousness.
Wow.
And so I was told to wear a pure silver crucifix, pray for angelic protections.
Mhm.
for myself, my mother, my family, and a bunch of other things. But it is interesting that this has happened a couple of times, and it's according to them no mistake that it's not accidental, these encounters,
Mhm.
especially more than once.
So it's interesting that the Hopi elders would have you wearing a silver crucifix.
Very much. I thought the same. I thought the
A
same.
mixture of practices here, cultures. Yeah.
Yeah, they asked me my background or what I was brought up with, and I
Mhm.
guess you have to incorporate
Oh,
to some degree what you were brought up with because
yeah,
that's kind of foundational.
it has meaning to you. Yeah.
Correct.
Wow. So have you seen any other kind of entities around your ranch, or have other people seen anything or?
Yes, other people have. We've had neighbors call us and tell us what they've seen, very much things that would be described as dogmen or werewolves or shapeshifters or skinwalkers,
Mhm.
and caretakers as well. That when we're not at the property, we've had them call and they've had encounters with.
Wow.
At one time, it was actually even three at one time. So these things apparently do happen.
Mm-hmm. And do you think is you're taking their interdimensional? It's just they're coming from another, they're able to go to another dimension and then just manifest to
That's a
whatever they want.
wonderful question. It is such a good question because I've only been provided kind of a glimpse into it, even though I study it constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been told by people who have alleged that family members are partaking in this particular style of the witchery way or of this magic
Mm-hmm.
is that it's fairly different from what we would assume. We've grown up with watching, the werewolves in London or Teen Wolf
Right.
or these other beliefs that the human being, you know, metamorphically changes and their bones bend and the teeth come out
Yeah.
and they become these animals. And it's very much different than that. It is much more a consciousness related form of magic. So a lot like I guess I've taken some remote viewing classes actually from the person that connected us as well, who's very
Angela.
yes, very talented at it.
Yeah.
And I guess it would be somewhat of a consciousness technology similar to remote viewing
Oh.
in that it was explained to me that they will literally kind of astrally project out into the field. And when they're very good at
Mhm.
manifesting or doing this form of bad medicine or black magic,
Right.
they attain a certain level of power where they no longer even have to leave their living room. They can be in a rocking chair at home and yet be astrally projected out in the field and manifest in a form that appears to the observer to be exactly that creature. So it's
This is
it's
so
definitely interesting.
this
Uh-huh.
is so different than you hear about it.
It is
You know what I
wild.
mean? It's like, yeah, so they're just around everywhere. Like, and it's just whether they can, I mean, there has to be the opposite, that some of them can project as good entities also, right?
100%. In fact, there is very much a light and dark to it, a yin and a yang. There's many light workers in the indigenous community, and they are probably the most knowledgeable of
Mhm.
what transpires.
It's something they, I mean, that it's so part of their culture that it's just all accepted. You know what I mean? It's like a matter of fact. It's,
Hmm.
yeah.
It is. I like that they and it's such an amazing tradition because you know our history is mostly what has survived the test of time on paper and has been written down.
Mhm.
And the magical thing about the indigenous lore and their history is that the oral tradition very much has it can move forward in a way that the written tradition can't, because
Right,
with book burnings and the loss of the loss of libraries like Alexandria, we lost things that could never be recovered.
right.
The indigenous oral tradition is very colorful, very full, because none of that got lost. They continued to keep that and innovate on it, add things to it, and it's flourished actually all the way to this day.
Oral is such a living tradition. I mean, when they go back and they're looking at the hieroglyphs and all of those things, they weren't really fixed. They were more like, we call them gerunds. Nobody uses that word anymore, but it's standing, looking. They're all action. They're all like energy. Like it was a different way of their verbal, their oral, and their written tradition. Ours is just fixed,
Mhm.
just in space and time. Yeah.
That's so true. And I like how you described it as a more living tradition. It's so true. It's more alive.
Now, so when the tribes were displaced, and so uh, this area where they're working out of, this is part of where they were displaced to.
Yes, there is very much a deep history to it. There were two tribes in the area, specifically Navajo and Ute,
Okay.
and there's a lot of history into what transpired and why this curse came about in this particular area. There was a massive band of the Navajo just over the Colorado border in a place known as the San Luis Valley. And they had very much found sort of an oasis where they were not infiltrating on any of the white settlements,
Mhm.
and the cavalry was completely unaware and unfamiliar with the area and did not know where they had basically disappeared to.
Oh, okay.
The Ute and the Navajo had some endeavors that were complex and tricky, and to benefit their own tribe, which you can't ever really blame someone for that.
Right.
However, they did it. The Ute sold out, or basically threw the Navajo under the bus and told the cavalry where this massive encampment was in the San Luis Valley.
Wow.
And this, according to the most powerful Navajo magicians and shaman, was considered unforgivable. And they asked their dark practitioners to unleash this curse of the Skinwalker, as they call it, in this area surrounding a fort known as Fort Duchesne, where the Ute were held. And that's a little bit of the history.
So the Skinwalker meme or whatever had been with them forever, but when they got here, then they released it in this area. I see.
Yes, traditionally, this was a type of magic that they subdued, they kept at a distance, they wanted
Right,
nothing to do with.
right.
However, when this was deemed unforgivable, for
Mhm.
lack of a better word, they actually went to those dark magicians and said, you know what? Why don't you pay us back, pay it forward? We can coexist, but you can basically run rampant in this area.
Mhm.
And basically, that's exactly what they unleashed them in the area and said, have at it, do whatever you want. We give you permission.
Mhm.
And this somewhat is unheard of. Unheard of.
No, I mean, I've never heard of it. It's like, that's why it's so great having you here with all of this information. Now, are the Ute and Navajo still residing by each other?
The Ute are still in the area. The Navajo are not. They are in other locations.
Hmm.
So this area known as the Path of the Skinwalker
Mhm.
is very much, it goes into an area known as Ouray, the Uintah Basin, the Ute Reservation, and it encompasses a good portion of what's known as the Uintah Basin in northeastern Utah.
Oh, okay. Wow. Amazing. I was looking kind of at the maps because I'm into the topography and maps, and I didn't realize like Nevada has no outlets to the ocean. It's so these basins, as you keep talking about basins, that these basins form. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's is that the
yeah.
same in Utah?
It's very interesting. It's very interesting.
Is that the same in Utah?
It is. These basins, they are very wild. There used to be a ancient lake in the area.
Mhm.
But and of course the Salt Lake used to connect to this massive lake. However, now it's very much not connected to the ocean, which is why it's so salty.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting place. In fact, back in 1776, when Father Escalante with the Catholic Church and his apprentice Dominguez
Mhm.
were mapping Spanish gold routes through the area on their way to California to the ocean,
Mhm.
they wrote in their notes that this was a very interesting area, and they alluded to the fact that there was high strangeness already in place. So, the relationship between the area and the curses and magic and what transpires now and later, there would be all kinds of different things that took place before people knew really about it, which included black budget Pentagon projects,
Right.
all sorts of experimentation, and, the government's knowledge that this area was different.
Now, when you're looking at that, is that around the 39th latitude?
Pretty close. Pretty close. Yeah, if you're familiar with Ben Misrick's book, The 37th Parallel,
Mhm.
that is kind of what they call a UFO highway. Whether it's an area of high strangeness or not, if you're around these certain parallels, there is a greater possibility of seeing things in the sky that are unidentified.
Right,
And this is very close to that parallel, and then add to it this, of course, indigenous curse.
right.
And there's a lot of multidisciplinary high strangeness is what I like to call it. This has basically become a tragedy of errors. There's a massive ridge line that is known as the Skinwalker Ridge that kind of scars this beautiful valley.
Oh, okay.
It's a red rock ridge and very porous. And the Utah Central Water Project put in a lake known as Bottle Hollow Reservoir on one side of the ridge. So all of this man-made water that is being held there started to seep
Oh,
through this ridge line underground. And then to add insult to injury, this is already cursed ground.
right.
They added the largest, most powerful power line
I,
set up, set up right along the ridge overhead.
right.
So a lot of electromagnetic frequency above, and then of course the water seeping through the red rock below, and of course the curse, and it just goes on and on. Basically everything that could go wrong kind of has, and I think that electromagnetic frequency, that water underground, and
Mhm.
all these other things sort of, the government testing, all of these things sort of throw their hat in the ring and add to the high strangeness, making it more poignant.
I was in like an occult class way back, and I can't remember where it is, but I retained that they were really talking about the nerve line of the Earth is the 39th parallel. So I've written about the 39th parallel, and I'm going to write a book on it because I've just been collecting so much information. But Washington, D.C. is on it. Beijing is on it. Denver is just right about there. The government, if the government has to go into hiding, is there. I mean, Mount Everett is there. The Air Force Academies. I have a list of 100 things that are put on it, and it's the Mason-Dixon line. that Jefferson put together. And so when you follow it, and then I was thinking, I was looking that up, but I didn't know exactly the area. I saw it was the 39th to the 40th, and then so it just spans that. It is that band around the world, and that Washington and Beijing, and then the North and South Korea are like right on it. You know what I mean? It just goes on and on. Yeah.
It's so amazing. So many interesting, you know,
Parallel. It's
synchronicities to
all
the
coming
phenomena.
together. Yeah. And I didn't know about the 37th parallel. I'm going to look that one up today. Yeah. So then other things like I was thinking like, because you're into this cryptozoology. And so are there other things besides just the skinwalkers that people see like Bigfoot or any of that sort of thing?
Yes, it is almost as if something allows these things to present themselves in our reality or enter through portals or creep through the veil, if you want to
Right.
term it that way. And
Creeps through the veil. That's good.
yeah, there's something, it's an area that has a very rich history of ancient animals. Of course, a lot of dinosaurs have been found nearby.
Oh,
There's a lot of fossils,
mhm.
and you will see that there are examples of people seeing what they can only describe as prehistoric animals, but in this reality. And that kind of is where I like to concentrate on the neurotheology or the new neuroscience of it, because you have to ask yourself, are these things really there in a
Mhm.
nuts and bolts way? Or is it the people who observe them having their brains attempt to explain something they're seeing? And interestingly,
I see. Yeah.
yeah, there's some correlations there.
Mhm. Wow. And have you found like what part of the brain this is?
Yes, it's very, very subjective. There is this location that basically our brains have the same area processing the data, whether we have the sighting of a UFO or a cryptozoological variant,
Mhm.
or or if we have a spiritual experience or a religious experience, the same portion of the brain is dealing with this. So what's very strange about that is that if you look at the neuroscience of religion, also known as neurotheology, it attempts to kind of explain why these experiences and the behavior that comes afterwards
Mhm.
is correlating with the neural phenomena and in the brain, and basically tries, like, all we can do is hypothetically believe that whatever is taking place is utilizing the way we engage with it as an observer.
Mhm.
We are using the same part of our brains that we would use if we were having a spiritual or a religious experience. So when you're trying to make sense of some of these sightings, it's interesting because you come up to the obvious, which is, well, then they must be demonic, or they must be angelic, or there may be something else going on. And in this particular area, there is a lot of what we call transient geomagnetic anomalies.
Okay.
And what those basically are is what they sound like. For absolutely no reason, you will have a spike in magnetism in particular areas.
Okay.
And in electromagnetic frequencies, there's a lot of that taking place. So what we do is look at previous examples of this and the effects on the human brain. And a really good example is something known as a study by Dr. Persinger. He created
Oh,
a
that's
device known as
fascinating.
the God helmet.
Yeah.
And this was a helmet
Mhm.
devised to help people suffering from Alzheimer's and other brain maladies. And what he did is he put little electromagnets inside of basically a helmet,
Right.
and he would fire them off randomly. And it
Mhm.
very much helped them with their illness. But what he found is when he would use this God helmet and fire these little electromagnets in this helmet, the people almost without exception would have religious or spiritual encounters with either aliens, demons, or what they would coin extraterrestrials. So there's something to it all.
That's amazing. Now, are we talking about the third ventricle?
It may very well have something to do with that because the human, as you know, the human brain is a curiosity.
Exactly. But I'm just saying from uh, occult practices and things that there's a thing called the cave. In the, Brahman's cave, the Chinese call it the diamond cave, Plato's cave, Merlin's cave. In the center of your brain, it's a theory, where the pineal and pituitary come together. So there's this whole thing, but in all the different religions, if you start looking at them, they all have that same etheric center where it's happening. So I was just wondering if there was a tie-in there.
That's correct. And that's a really good tie-in. I think that's a good introduction to the third ventricle because people call it all sorts of things, of course. There's a lot of masterful works in ancient culture where we see that many symbols resemble the third ventricle. People oftentimes say, you see things in your third eye, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when this third ventricle or the third eye is blocked? There are claims that certain toxins, specifically in modern times, kind of block this or calcify this this tool that we were born with that allowed us to more or less be more in touch with these spiritual realms and have more vision, not physical vision, but more inner vision, right? More awareness to our surrounding. And yeah, that there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
Just like fluoride, how that's such a big thing now for calcifying the pineal gland, which is one of those major ones in this whole process.
That's correct.
And and then in the third ventricle, it's where the cerebral spinal fluid gathers, before it makes its trip down the spine and back up. I mean, so it's like, yeah, it seems like that point is in there. Yeah.
Very much related. And yeah, maybe something about this geomagnetism kind of shakes that calcification loose or allows things to, as we said, come through more easily. It is very much an area that seems to be more elastic with the unseen world. Yeah.
And if they measured like people's auras and things there, like it would seem they would be more,
There has been a lot of different research and investigations measuring all sorts of body functions. And, you will see things like auras and things that are, how can I put it, multiplied in this particular zone or this energy field compared to other locations where they're a bit more subdued. So all sorts of different examples have been analyzed. We've looked at, not just myself, others as well. If you have something that works and you take it in this area, whether that be a technology, something like the God helmet, or that be something like meditation, or if you take something that works, and then you take it to this area, there seems to be an exponential magnification of it working.
Wow. Well, you're going to have a lot of people like flocking there.
It is very interesting.
Seems like the perfect place to put these ashrams or retreat centers, right?
Correct. We have one right next to us, and it's happening. It's already happening. I kind of like to I see it as sort of a, you remember how Sedona, you would remember how Sedona
Right.
was in the 70s, right?
Yes. Oh my
Um
God, I went there during the pandemic because I do feng shui. Someone hired me there. And I went out to those power spots and there were so many tourists. There'd be like 150 tourists. There was no more, they like had zapped all the special energy that, the magic was gone.
yeah,
Amazing.
that's how I would describe it, is this is how Sedona was probably in the 70s.
Oh, wow. That's like something to say. Now, the government, like with the Skinwalker Ranch, weren't they involved in that when Bigelow owned it? Weren't they involved in that for a while? I mean, they must have been looking at all of this also.
That's right. There were two, interestingly enough, when I was at the height of investigating nightly, I thought it was just a ranch. I didn't have any reason to think anything different. But unbeknownst to me, there were very much black budget projects, black budget Pentagon projects taking place. And one was known as OSAP, or the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. And it was tied in to another program known as ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Basically, there's something going on here. What is it? Is it a threat?
Mhm.
And these investigations and projects were funded by the United States in black budget terms. They were programs that had special access protocols. Nobody knew about it. They were completely secret, and yeah, funded by defense.
Wow. And then did they ever share any of their information?
So it not a whole lot. Some of these things have overlapped,
Mhm.
and some of them have come out, but they were researching all kinds of stuff
Yeah.
like invisibility cloaks. They had these things, quote unquote, toys that they were playing with. And it's very difficult because although it's been newly publicized, the
Mhm.
details regarding much of the research has proven pretty outlandish and stuff that a lot of people just don't believe. But with this truly bizarre research carried out in an area which is truly bizarre, I'm
Right.
sure that they had very amazing things happen.
So when you moved here, because did you find that your sensibilities like changed? I mean, you became more intuitive and all these sort of things?
Yeah, it is at first I knew something was happening and I didn't know how I felt about it. I just wanted to know more.
Yeah.
And as the decades slowly went by and
Mhm.
I kept seeing things that made very little sense,
Mhm.
I honestly started to believe that there is something there,
Yeah.
something that is precognitive, something that is an intelligence, and
Mhm.
something that becomes familiar with you.
Oh.
And although it likes to engage, when it likes to engage,
Mhm.
it usually interfaces in a way that I'm sure benefits it, not us. So a lot of times people say, oh, it's all malevolent. It has to be something evil or negative on the spectrum. While that can be a reality in certain experiences, I
Mhm.
don't believe that that's entirely the truth. I believe that the fact that this precognitive sentient intelligence is engaging with human beings at all is
Mhm.
miraculous. And it is something that needs to be studied like it has been.
This like how the plasma physics is so big now, and they're equating plasma as etheric and all of these sort of things. And the Kordylewski clouds that are between the Earth and the Moon, these huge plasmic beings that they say now they're looking at have intelligence. I mean,
Mhm.
this reminds me that you could have like one of these clouds there, like that energy that you're existing in.
Well, and that's really interesting that you mention that, because there are things that are very much uh, depicted in ancient cultures that take place there. The Greeks
Mhm.
spoke of, these disembodied voices. They thought they were the gods speaking above us.
Right.
And this is one of the phenomena that takes place there quite often, disembodied voice phenomena, where I've heard it multiple times. You'll hear a chatter over your heads
Ah,
of, it sounds like people talking.
uh-huh.
And so there's very much something
Yeah.
taking place. It's just, what exactly is it?
Yeah. No, I
And
mean, you're just on the verge. Yeah. And so it's such an exciting time to be there. You know what I mean?
it is.
Because it's opening. I mean, I find it interesting that the plasma physicists, like they now actually agree that there is what they call a dust cloud around people. You
Yes.
know what I mean? They don't call it your aura, any these dust clouds. So I mean, you're coming there where the physics and the metaphysics and so much stuff is starting to come together.
Yeah. And I think any connection is a good connection. You just need to, as you say, be protected in
Yeah.
your own belief system
Mhm,
with positivity,
mhm.
and, go into it advocating, I'm okay with connection, just nothing negative or reciprocal of a negative influence.
Yeah.
And I like to think of it as, there's people that go into it with bad thoughts and bad energy, and then they wonder why they're bit. And it's a lot like, squeezing a hamster too much and
Yeah.
then wondering why it bites you.
Right.
It's sort of, it is its own intelligence, but at the same time, it's our own creation as observers. Whatever we come to the table with, whatever we ante up, is
Right.
what will be exponentially given back to us. In fact, the secret experimentation in the Defense Department encountered something that they called bidirectional mimicry, is what they termed it, which basically meant whatever you came to the table with would be exponentially magnified and
Oh,
sent back your way.
that's now there's a lesson. It just reminds me because I do feng shui and I've been hired for several times, like where there's they think there's entities or things, and it reminds me of this one house I went to in Bakersfield where you just entered the house. It was ice cold. I mean, you just had they had vacated it because they couldn't live there anymore. But they just were, you just got chills, you know what I mean? And that's always kind of like what you get when you enter these where these other energies are, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where you are, it sounds like it's a more living energy. It's not, it doesn't have that. I mean, it maybe has it at places, but yes.
Yeah, and there's some interesting how kind of there's some interesting things that transpire with people who
Mhm,
have been involved with some of these more top secret developments in the area. And one of the interesting things is something they call interference syndrome, which is very strange because you'll have very high caliber, high functioning rocket scientists, physicists, or other employees engaging in concepts having to do with exotic propulsion systems or things of that nature, or other scientific things.
mhm.
And what they'll have is little portions of their brains basically appear to be dying off when they have a brain scan or an MRI. But what they're finding is that these individuals are still uh, not only able to do these very complex jobs, but in many cases their IQs go up. So they have under the scan, they have less brain matter, but on paper, their IQ actually goes up, which has brought in a very interesting possibility that they may be downloading information from these areas in a practical way. And it does not compute on our end because we tend to evaluate the brain in ways that are different
Right.
than people did historically. So I don't know. There's a
Well,
lot. There's a lot
this
to
is this is good
unpack.
stuff that you don't see or hear anywhere. Now, are any of your books dealing with this?
So far my books more or less have just looked at the high strangeness, but I think that this would be an arena that I need to investigate.
This would be so good, just because of how Robert Temple's written that book, the New Temple of Heaven, about plasma physics. That's just going, everybody's reading it. And so you're on the verge, and all of this you have is like fabulous. Yeah.
I think that's a really good idea. That's where we need to look.
The other stuff they've been through. A lot of people have been through it, but this just puts it whole new, and then especially when there's been government research, it gives it a, validity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that these studies will likely lead to all kinds of advancements in the near term, and we don't know where that's headed.
Exactly. I mean, when you mentioned Persinger, I remember him. He invented another machine that, like, for piles of rubbish and junk, just and so if you had a pile in your house of all just stuff, you could go there and it had an odor, and there was a specific odor that you could get. So it just proved that don't want to have these piles of clothes and all of this stuff that people have, because it does create this. And he was an amazing person.
He was.
And I don't know why that God helmet isn't around more now.
It is in certain circles. You can still purchase them. They're fairly fringe because you don't really know what they're doing. We just know that they're doing something, and that people are coming away with spiritual, religious, or extraterrestrial experiences after wearing them.
Kind of like doing ayahuasca. Or something like that. Well, that's right. Something that nobody's doing recently. That seems like someplace that, maybe some of these things like Brain Tap and some of those apps they have are incorporating some of that now.
Yeah, and the God helmet is something that I have taken up to the area. And I haven't worn it myself, but others and friends, we've gotten data on its effects in the area, and they are exponential in the area, much as the other things are.
Okay, so we'll have you back for another interview after you don your God helmet. So I think, let's see, I think we're almost there at the thing. Do you have anything else you'd like to share? This was all such great information. I just loved it.
I just absolutely love discussing it too. There's so much that is, these concepts include so many things that seem fringe at the moment, but I believe over time this will all become more mainstream.
And aren't you just so happy you live right there? I mean, wow. And then you're going to have these children that are going to grow up there. I mean, it's really great.
Yeah, their mom isn't so sure about that, but I like to think so. I like to think so.
Okay, well, this was a really great interview. So Ryan has a good podcast. Is that weekly?
Yeah, just about every week. Absolutely.
I mean, all kinds of things, from time travel to UFOs to crypto zoology to culture. It's a really nice one. It's so encompassing, And then his website is, you want to give your website?
Sure. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube for free. It's also on Patreon, or you can just go to heroparanormal.com. And the website for the base camp is spacewolfresearch.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I'm so thankful for Angela recommending you. And this was great. So thanks again.
I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you. Have a blessed day.